Hello everyone and welcome to this new class of this history course on typography, where we are practically in the middle of the 20th century, and after all that avant-garde movement we saw in the previous class, with all that experimentation, innovation, abstraction, etc., unfortunately the Second World War is going to arrive. I won't go into much detail here. Simply, as we all know, this war lasted from 1939 to 1945, and I want to show you how the Nazi regime made a very specific use of typography. As I was saying, we are at that moment of simplification, abstraction, and refinement of typography through much more conceptual processes. And then the Nazis go backward, and in all their propaganda, they use Gothic typography. If you remember, we mentioned Gothic typography in the Middle Ages. And here I show you, well, some posters where we see how it is used intentionally and clearly with political symbolism, trying in this way to link the roots of that Third Reich, as they called it, with the most ancient past of the Germanic peoples. Well, and once the Second World War ended, we have to talk about a small country called Switzerland, which remained neutral during the two world wars and will also remain neutral in the post-war period. It joins the international community, but not the European Union, and becomes a refuge for both political thinkers and artists. In this way, Switzerland will become the heir to the new typography, that manifesto we talked about, inheriting the ideas of the Bauhaus and bringing together all the concepts of 20th century modernity. In this context, we have to talk about one figure, Joseph Müller-Brockmann. Joseph Müller-Brockmann will be the best representative of this so-called Swiss design or international style. This Swiss style is primarily characterized by the following principles that I list here. Clarity and readability. The message needs to be as clear and direct as possible. Use sans serif fonts. Fonts like Helvetica, Universe, or Accidents Grotesque will mainly be used. The entire design is based on a grid system that organizes the content in a logical, precise, and orderly manner. Because although there is a strong structure, the elements are not always centered. Symmetry is avoided to provoke dynamism. The next point would be that there is a preference for photography instead of illustrations. The colors used are limited, sober color palettes with lots of white and black and gray tones, and when bright colors are used, it will always be as a specific touch to give a certain accent to the design at a given moment. Use of white space. Negative space is essential for giving air and clarities to the composition. This is very important and very beautiful in this international style. It's not just about what we write, what we create, the form, but also the counterform. Next point, typography as the main element of design. The text will not only communicate content, but will visually structure and define the entire design. Next point, objective and functional approach. Unnecessary embellishment is avoided. Each element has a practical purpose. As you see, this idea of functionalism that came from the Bauhaus continues in the international style. Finally, we can talk about neutrality. The style seeks to be universal and timeless, not influenced by passing trends. If we continue here, in this next slide, we see two other posters, where the hierarchy in the use of text is played with. All elements are perfectly arranged under a grid. The colors are simple, playing with black and white in most cases. Symmetry is avoided. Dynamic compositions are sought using pure geometries, such as B-circles or rectangular elements marking diagonals at 90 degrees, but everything placed as if in its place, very neatly, logical and precise, and the typefaces are always sans serif typefaces. Here we see another example. We can clearly see the use of grids and how decorative elements are very specific and based on simple geometries that serve as accents to create dynamism in the design. Here we see two other examples. We see again in the example on the left the use of diagonals, but always supported by a grid, and how the color elements, which we could say are embellishments, are very controlled, they're very geometrized, those decorative elements also subject to grids and with a concept behind them. For example, in this poster on the left, we are talking about music, and these decorations seem to want to represent those musical notes on the staff, but conceptually with perfect squares. On the right, we see another example, but this time playing with circles. In short, it's a very contemporary type of design today. I love it, and I think it can help you a lot when you're looking for inspiration. In this regard, I would like to recommend Grid Systems by Joseph Müller-Brockmann, a book I consider essential for making professional use of grids in our designs. Well, and moving forward, we then reach 1945, where a key invention for typographic development occurs. I'm talking about phototype setting. For the first time since 1440, when Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, we can leave behind lead movable type. To understand it quickly, with photo composition, what we are going to do is assemble texts through photographs. That is to say, we forget about those expensive, heavy, and difficult to handle metallic lead types to start working with light. Each letter was projected onto film or photosensitive paper in such a way that each letter was like a tiny photo. In this way, words were assembled much faster without having to use metal. In the following decade, using this system, the so-called New Hask Grotesque will emerge, designed by Max Miedinger in 1957, which is merely an attempt to improve on the accident grotesque. Here I show you the same text written with accident grotesque and with the New Hask Grotesque. As you see in this new variant, there is some modulation in the thickness of some letters. Let's say they are stylized, endowed with some humanism, a certain finesse and grace, which the accident grotesque lacked. Notice, for example, the S's, or for instance, how the A changes, how the O is slightly stylized, creating in this way a friendlier typeface. And this typeface is nothing more than what we know today as the Helvetica. In 1960, the name will be changed to Helvetica with the intention of promoting this Swiss international style we have been discussing. Basically, all publications in the Swiss style will be made using this typography. If we continue forward, we find another typeface that I would like to highlight, known as Universe. It was created in 1957 also by Adrian Frutiger, and the main contribution of this typeface is that, relying on the invention of photo composition, it will develop the concept of a supertype family. Now we no longer need lead types. It is no longer necessary to create each variant of a typeface family in lead. Through photo composition, we can do it in a quick and relatively cheap way. And then, here on the right, we see how a typeface family emerges with a lot of weights, from ultralight to extra black, generating an enormous richness in the typeface family not seen until then. We now jump to another typeface called Antique Olive. This typeface was created in 1962 by Roger Excoffin. And as you can already see on screen, it is a typeface that, although it adheres, let's say, to the norms of the time, slightly breaks with them, plays with the established rules, and in this way creates a really interesting and curious typeface. Each letter has, let's say, its own idiosyncrasy. We see how modulation is played with a lot, how the ascenders and descenders are super small, how, for example, the bowl of the O models a shape in a way, even irregular. Here I show you some examples of how this typography was used at the time. It's a very versatile font that can be used both for a travel guide, as we see in the example on the left, or for a more child-oriented ad for a Lego game. And finally, in this class, we are going to look at one last typeface, known as avant-garde. It was designed in 1970 by Herb Lubalin and Tom Carnace, and it continues somewhat with the idea of antique olive, of playing with the forms. And it's because we are in the 1970s, that is, we are in the middle of postmodernism. And what does postmodernism mean? Basically, it means stopping the belief in fixed rules, in great truths, and in everything having to be perfect or serious, and starting to mix, play, doubt, and break the rules. Briefly, so that we have it very clear in our minds, let's say that modernism believed in progress, science, order, and clean beauty. Its paradigm was functionalism. Form follows function. And then postmodernism says, sure, all of that is so perfect, but what if everything depends on the point of view? And from there, the playing begins. In this typography, we can clearly see how suddenly one letter steps on another. The strokes are sometimes ultra thin, sometimes not. Some letters resemble the geometrization of Futura, while others have a more humanistic character, a play of forms that results in a super interesting typography and that can be very useful for certain projects. Well, as a summary, in this class we have seen 4 typefaces. Helvetica, the maximum representative of the Swiss international style. Universe, which continues that line and paves the way for superfamilies by relying on the invention of the photo composition. Already moving into the 60s and 70s, that is, in postmodernism, we have seen the antique olive and finally the avant-garde, which play much more with forms and start to propose much more, so to speak, expressionist rather than rationalist typefaces. Well, we will end it here. I hope you really enjoyed the class and see you in the next video.